We're here because of God's grace. It's through God's love and grace that we acknowledge the First Nations people on whose land we meet. We acknowledge their care for country, land, oceans, and waters. We acknowledge elders past, present, and future. We acknowledge past injustices. And we acknowledge the need through Jesus and with Jesus to work towards conciliation. You've found the Next Steps podcast from Citywide Baptist Church, where we go deeper and wrestle with the stuff we talk about on a Sunday morning. So please join us as we take next steps together. Hello and welcome to the Next Steps podcast from Citywide Baptist Church. My name is Matt. I'm your host, and joining me today are Pastor Paul Dare, Pastor Dan Hutchinson, and Matt Garvin, our senior pastor at Citywide. We're recording this podcast on Monday, the 8th of November, and you should be able to find it on Wednesday, the 10th of November. Matt, do you want to tell us what we talked about on Sunday?
Yeah, well, it was interesting, sort of trying to capture the heart of everything we've been talking about over the past couple of months as we looked at what does it mean to grow faith, and particularly the diagram of the journey of faith. And as I was preparing for it, I realised in myself how easy it is to lose hope, and that at the heart of our faith is this call to hope. And part of what triggered my realisation of it was that little Cleo Smith was found. And I realised, I think for a lot of people, they talk about it in some ways how surprised they were, how many of us kind of expect those stories not to have a happy ending. And all of us have had lots of times in our lives where things haven't had a happy ending. And that kind of conditions you not to have hope. And I started by talking about the word hope and how actually our usage of the word decreased dramatically from the 1800s right the way through to 1992. And then all of a sudden, for some reason, it started to pick up in 1992. And I wonder if this double-edged thing was happening as we took this trajectory downwards. We were trusting more and more in science and in our own abilities to get things done, and less in some kind of external hope. But as we hit 1992 and all the plans we had for how things were going to work we started to realise that the whole world wasn't actually going to be necessarily a better place because of science, that the Berlin Wall had fallen down, but things still were messy. Then all of a sudden we started to need and look for hope in a much stronger way. And we started to, I think, the human desire for hope became more and more prevalent. And I talked about how it's kind of normal to be in a place where you find it hard to hope if you've had your hope deferred. And Proverbs, of course, says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick." Where somehow, if you start to become hopeless, if you start to hope less, it actually is a painful place to be. And I think that's where we as a society have been, where we've been hoping less. And we talked about how that tree diagram that's been at the heart of our discussion over the past couple of months, how for many of us fundamentally we believe less in hope. And so it was really important to say, okay, well, at the heart of our faith is this call to hope. But Paul prays in Ephesians that he prays that the eyes of our heart would be enlightened so that we would know the hope to which we're called. Hebrews tells us to hold unswervingly to the hope we profess. And I think when Peter tries to communicate the strategy to change the world, he says, always be ready to give an answer to people who want to ask you why you've got hope. What is the hope you've got, and where does that come from? As you hold and your focus on Jesus, as Jesus is Lord, it's going to produce hope. And so we talked about that. Really, the diagram was a way of explaining that, how that as we keep Jesus Lord, it is the process of us more and more and more living from hope as we reflect, recognize, choose, and act. And I finished by just coming back to, I think, Jesus' call to us in Matthew 11, where he talks about, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And I think rightfully, I think we can say, come. Here Jesus is saying, come to me, all you who are hopeless, and I will give you hope. I think that's part of the subtext of that text. He says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, and I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And in first century Judaism, the yoke was how the Pharisee, or not the Pharisees, but the teachers of the law, the rabbis, if you followed a rabbi, it would be like you took their yoke upon you. It was you were following their way of life. It was part of how that was described, the colloquial idiom of the time. And so Jesus is saying, take my way of life on, and that's where you find rest. That's where ultimately you find hope. And I think that kind of captures what we want to be as a church. We want to be people who live from hope because we love Jesus and focus on him. So that's really, I think, the heart of what we're trying to communicate, and the journey we've been on to explain what it means to live from hope, and breaking that down into the reflect, recognize, choose, and act diagram.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Paul, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I've been thinking about hope and what we talked about on Sunday a bit. And I think hope is on two levels. There's the hope, your personal hope, which is Matt was just talking about, that hope that, I don't know, the hope that you get through faith that Jesus will do the things he says he will do. And there's that hope. But then there's the hope we project. And that's the other thing we talked about on Sunday, was the hope we project. And I was just thinking about faith, hope, and love, in 1 Corinthians 13. And, faith is what gets you there. Love is what you should, love is what you show to people. But hope is the reason you do it. Because you hope people to come to know you. You really want people to come to know the Lord. So that's a hope, and that's a hope. And they got me to thinking about hope, though, is just so important in church life and in an individual's life, in our walk. Because if we aren't feeling hope, how can we show hope? And if we don't show hope, how can anybody else see how we're different? And it's just it's actually quite sobering when you think about it. Like we all joke sometimes about hope, and, like you're having a bad day, but you go, I'm feeling okay. But it's what you actually do that in those moments that count. So people have to look at you and go, why are you different? Why you got that hope? But unless you got the hope, you can't show hope. And it's just this continual circle and battle to show hope. And I was thinking, as a church, anybody who's in a church, for a church to grow, the church needs to show hope as a church. And then that got me thinking some more. I sometimes overthink, but it got me thinking some more, is how do we as a church show hope? And that's sort of where it's got to. So I actually loved it. It was really challenging, and it's amazing how going back to basics continually refines and retunes your thought and continually puts the focus back on Jesus without getting all sort of wrapped up in one subject. The basics means you've just got that overall picture of what God is and who God is and who Jesus is and what we're called to do. And I just think it's amazing. So I love the series.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. How do you bounce off that, Dan?
Yeah, I was came away quite challenged in a few aspects. I think, I see myself as an optimist, and I think always kind of looking at different situations to see what's God doing in that, or what where's he going in that? And so thinking about right now with all the stuff that I've got going on, I mean, I was just talking about before we went on air that, about looking at houses and just the market seems crazy right now. But a lot of people are saying back to me, and I feel it too, is that I have hope that this is all part of God's plan and it will play out. So I've had a few people comment on how can you be so laid back or look calm. And there's times where I'm not feeling that way, but but a lot of the time it's that hope in knowing that that God is sovereign and he's got it all in his hands. And I think yesterday, while I was sitting in the service listening to Matt, I actually had someone sitting beside me that was saying it seemed like God was really using Matt's word to speak with them at that time. That they were saying I came in here because I was looking for hope. I've made decisions and it feels like there's things around me right now that just want to keep pushing me down, and I'm just seeking some hope, seeking some people that have hope. And so that really challenged me as I think we get caught up a little bit in the bubble of what's God doing in our world or amongst us as a church, but also to lift our eyes and go, hey, what about in our community? And that's what Paul was kind of saying there, weren't you? Like what's the hope that as a church we're communicating? And so for this person, they were wanting that, and I think we get caught of it too much as the word. And I think, like Matt was saying, with the word, only just increasing in its popularity from 92, which I was only 2 when that started to shift. So obviously it's grown up with me, but I think definitely the world is looking for hope, and it was a great message to wrap up the series as we focus on Jesus, and that following these principles is what leads to us stepping more into that hope and really recognizing what God's doing for us, but also for the community.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. I guess it is interesting because we do have built into our faith. There is that hope that, in a sense, I feel like, Matt, that can contextualize things that happen in your life. And I think it's probably one of the reasons why people who are followers of Jesus can tend to be more optimistic about their own lives. But we don't always let that shine through to the outside world, do we?
Well, I think that's the central wrestle of faith, that all of us, whether you're a pastor or not, can lose sight of Jesus, and that the heart of faith is to live from the context, or live your life centered around Jesus and the truth that is in him. But the Apostle Paul talks about this wrestle of the flesh versus the spirit. There's always part of us that becomes self-focused, and it's so, and life is difficult. Like you hit points of disillusionment, and things don't go the way you want them to go, and you quickly learn it's going to hurt less if you hope less. And so you start to, the little kids live on a roller coaster, sort of up and down, wholeheartedly joyful and wholeheartedly despairing when they don't get the lottery they wanted, or but the danger is that we can start to see being an adult as is normalizing all our emotional worlds and behaviours at a lower level because we hope less. And I think we're called to live from hope that is based on the future that is ahead of us in and through Jesus. That and also the present, the fact that the Son of God is with us now and calling us to life now. I don't know. It's hard to that promise. If there's not, how can we be hopeless? But so often we just lose sight of that. and it's so easy to feel powerless and hopeless, even though the real Son of God is in our lives and calling us to life.
So I was thinking of hope in the terms of the human hope, that deep hope, and this is what Christian hope is, I think, because when you get to human hope, it's a completely different story. Because in the grief, in the sadness, like when I lost my wife 5 years ago, it was only hope that kept me going. It was hope that she'd gone to heaven because she loved the Lord. It was hope that there was something different that actually keeps you going. So you've got the world hope, which is different, I think, to the Christian hope too. And I think when we talk, we've got to be careful not to get the two types of hope mixed up. Because the worldly hope is, I hope for 2 cars, the latest television, the latest phoneware and all that stuff. But then there's the God hope, which is, I just want to have a family who surrounds me and loves me, and that's all I need. And I think there's a difference, and we just got to be sure that we concentrate on the right hope.
Well, that was kind of what I was getting at earlier when I'm really glad you said that, Paul, because that was what I was getting at when I was saying that when we have our faith in Jesus, it contextualizes stuff that happens in our lives. It helps us to put things in their correct places in a way that's healthy for our emotional world. Like I can really relate to your story. I mean, mine's a different experience, but being a parent of special needs children, you have lots of challenges, and there are lots of times where you can think, oh, why me? Why is this happening? This is unfair and all that. But I mean, I don't know. Kylie and I have often had conversations with each other saying, I don't know how people who don't have what we've got with our faith, I don't know how they cope, because we've got this optimism, this hope that comes with it, that God made our children for a reason. He made them the way they are for a reason. He gave them to us for a reason. And that there's a plan for everything. Matt and Dan, I don't know how you guys respond to that.
Yeah, well, and I think that's part of there's this complicated line you've got because I don't think God produces death.
No.
And I don't think God produces pain. But the sovereignty of God means that all things work together for good for those who are in Christ Jesus and called according to his plan. That somehow God's grace means that we can trust God even in the horrible things.
Yeah.
And it's what I keep coming back to Psalm 23, where it says, he guides me on right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. That sometimes right paths are horrible. They feel like death. But this is the hope we have, is that God is with us. I love that as Jesus is announced to the world, he's called Emmanuel, God with us. And at the end of his life, he says, and I will be with you. And so the Christian hope is this truth that the Son of God is with us. And we don't have to do things on it. We are never on our own if we are open to Jesus. But the fallen human nature, there's part of us that always, we want to be the star of the show. We want to be the center of the stage. And there's this paradoxical trade-off that has to happen in order to find the hope where we let him be the star of the show. We let him be the center of the stage in our lives. And as we do that, we actually find the life that we think will happen when we are the stars. And that gradually, that there's this journey he takes us on where we gradually recognize where he isn't the center of the stage or the star of the show in our lives, and where we are, and our behavior slightly changes, and we start to live differently in a way that is obviously hopeful.
Yeah, and I just, and tell me if I'm going a bit off track, but as you were talking, I think I'm reading through John, the Gospel of John, and particularly that middle section there, Jesus really goes hard in defending his connection with God. But the disciples are asking him in chapter 9, Rabbi, who sinned for this man to be blind, his parents or himself, that he would be born blind? And Jesus says, neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. And so, just like as you're saying, I think sometimes we lay punishment on ourselves, or think, why is this happening to me? What have I done wrong, or what can I attribute to this? And like Matt said, I don't think God lines us up to put this stuff to punish us, particularly things like that, blindness, or like you're saying with disabled kids. That's far from the truth. But what it's saying there is that it's opportunity for God's glory. And that might not necessarily be a miracle in being healed or things changing from that, but it's that hope and that resilience amongst being in the storm or the trial that glorifies God amongst that. Yeah. So as you were saying, Matt, about your situation of people not knowing how they could get through it without having hope. I think without knowing that Jesus is with us, that he's the light amongst it, that helps us persevere and helps us know that there's that hope there for us, that helps us get through those but helps glorify God amongst it. And we can have hope for our kids, our situation, or whoever, that God's got a plan and a purpose there, as Pastor Matt was saying, to work together for his good. But I think that's where it comes back to what we're talking about. It happens as we give honor to God in that. Does that make sense? In actually pausing, reflecting, recognizing what the Spirit's doing, how I should respond, because I think we can miss it too. And that's what Jesus was really talking to his disciples and challenging people, that you're missing God's kingdom because you're too caught up in what you think needs to happen instead of what God has planned.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been actually that story from John, I've always found quite striking. Where it's like, who sinned? Whose fault is it? And Jesus' response there of like, it's nobody's fault, and something great's going to come of this thing, even though it's hard, even though it's a difficult situation. There's going to be a beautiful thing that results from it, and that's amazing. But I think, Paul, I don't know if this resonates with you, but I mean, my experience is we don't come through these hard things because we're so good. It's because we've got such a faithful God.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I remember going through the final stages and all that with my departed wife, and there was anger there was the why me there, and there's all that, and I think that's okay. But you've got to also then spend time reflecting, and it's when you spend that time reflecting, and like we said, like you go through bad times, but when you reflect, that's when your faith shines through. That's when the hope shines through. That's when you can actually see Jesus and accept, not in a fatalistic way, but accept that it's no one's fault. And I think that's the biggest thing, and that's what the reading in John was about. It's no one's fault. These things happen, and then Pastor Matt was saying about they happen, and God has a chance to show his goodness through it. And I think like everything works for those, like you said, everything works for good for those who believe in him. And sometimes it's hard to see it, but in reflection, you can always see it.
Yeah. Matt, when you ended your part of the message on Sunday, you left us with a question. Did you just want to share that question with us? Because it's quite an interesting thing to think about.
Well, we'd set up the obvious thing that all of us can live from hope, and that Peter makes it clear that it is those who are living from hope, their lives will be questionable. They'll produce questions from people, and you'll need to give an answer for the hope that you have. And so the question we ask people is the way you are currently living demonstrating that hope? Or is the way you are currently living more framed by pain? Is it the avoidance of pain, or is it living out of pain? And this question of how could your life better reflect hope?
Mm. Yeah, I think that's it's right, because if we're on the right track in our faith lives, that hope's going to be bleeding through into everything we do. And it's when we're not living like that, when we're doing like what Jesus says in the book of Matthew, where it's like a lamp that's been covered up, and we're not doing any good anymore. Paul, how does that hit you?
Yeah, it is so true. You know, like I was actually thinking, and it got me back to the GLS, the Global Leadership Summit the other day, and that one quote that I can't remember who it said. It said, "Do you light up the room when you walk into it, or when you walk out of it?"
Yeah.
And I was thinking, that's what hope's about. You know, like when you're there, are you producing hope or producing despair, or just, you know, what is your attitude? What is God showing through? What's showing through you as far as God's concerned? And I think if you're showing hope, you're one of these people who light up a room when you go, rather than when you arrive, rather than when you leave. And I think that's really what it boils down to. And I agree totally. You know, like we have a choice, and this is the, you know, like hope doesn't mean not having bad days. Hope doesn't mean there won't be bad times. But hope means there's always light there. And I think this is the thing, you know, like you can be going through the worst of times and still exude hope. You can be going through the worst of absolute worst and still exude hope. And I actually think in some ways it's easier to exude hope in the worst times than it is in the best times, because in the best times, I think sometimes you forget about God. As when you're clinging on to God, it's easy to, you actually show more hope, I believe. And so for me, the challenge of the statement on Saturday was, you know, like it's a choice, and it's a much easier choice to show God when you're having a bad time. But it's when you're having a good time, when things are sailing along swimmingly well, that's when you get a choice. And I actually find that hard to show hope then, because then the world starts getting hard, and you think, oh no, I can do this by myself, but you forget about God. So I love the challenge of the question, and it actually challenges me to be on my good days to show more hope.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. So on Sunday I actually did the second half of our message, and as we come to the end of next steps, we've been trying to figure out, well, how do we wrap this up as a teaching team? And one of the ideas that got thrown out there was, well, maybe we could get someone to talk about how they've experienced the series and what they've gotten out of it. And considering I hadn't done any of the messages in the series, I thought, well, I'll volunteer for that. And it was really interesting working through how it's impacted me. I was able to disclose a little bit about how Matt Garvin in his planning for the year had originally planned a different sermon series for this time of the year. It was called The Minefield, where we were going to be talking about all kinds of really interesting and controversial topics like gender, sexuality, politics, climate change, pandemics. And I was really excited about doing that. I kind of wanted to put my name down to do one of the messages every week of the series. It was so exciting to me. And then he sort of said, oh, we're going to have to do a series just before we do that, about just to get our fundamentals in order. And I sort of thought, Yeah, I suppose he's right, but that sounds less fun. And then the series kept getting bigger, and I was pretty skeptical. I didn't think I'd get a lot out of it, but to be honest, I was able to share on Sunday. I've gotten a ton out of Next Steps, and the biggest takeaway that I took from it really was, in the end, we really weren't ready for the minefield. We really weren't ready to engage in these big topics, because you can't get into that stuff in a healthy and effective way. You can't talk about something like climate change, for example, or gender in a healthy, effective way as a church if you haven't got all your fundamentals, all your basic stuff in a solid spot. And so, yeah, I found myself in the position of being able to sort of encourage people who perhaps haven't engaged in this stuff to give it a really good look, because it's so important. Yeah, so I don't know. I guess that's the question I wanted to ask you guys about being able to move into engaging with these sort of hard things that are going on in our world around us, in our culture. I don't know whether that rings true to you, Matt, about our fundamentals, about needing to get that in order before we do it.
Yeah, certainly for me, and this is there's part of me that would much prefer to engage with intellectual issues and be able, particularly issues that don't directly affect me, and enjoy the wrestle of all that and point out where other people are wrong and right, and then face the truth that there is still part of me that is not subject to Christ, that Jesus is not Lord of, and that I've still got. I think through this series, I have been confronted more than usual in just how far I've got to go, and I can name this process, and it's true for me, and I can see how Jesus has taken me on a journey where I have gradually learnt to focus on him and spend time reflecting, and then recognising where I've got to grow and making different choices, and in fellowship actually doing it, and that it changes my character. But I also realise, and it's nice to look back and realise, yeah, I have grown a lot. But I think it does bring me face to face with the mirror that you quoted, and where I look at myself in the mirror through the lens of the Word of God and realise, yeah, I've still got a way to go. And so I think this is possibly what Jesus means when he says, look, deal with a speck in your own eye with the plank in your own eye before you try and deal with a speck in someone else's eye. That there is a real danger in wanting to sort other people out without being deeply aware of how bigger challenges you personally have to face, and that this little diagram, I'm hoping we don't lose it. I'm hoping we keep coming back to it and just be reminded we're all on a journey of growth, and Jesus is gentle, and he doesn't expect us to be perfect, but we need to be growing in him and be moving more and more to freedom. It's not a destination you reach at any point in your life. It's this ongoing journey.
Yeah, I found I can so relate to what you're saying, because and as I shared on Sunday, one of my big challenges was realizing all these things that are bubbling away in my life that I'm not quite aligned with Jesus on that. I'm gonna have to sort that out. And I think a lot of people, if they're honest about it, have had to reflect on that throughout the course of this series. Dan, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I actually had the opposite response, I think, to you, Matt, when Pastor Matt changed the series, because I was just excited about and seeing the potential of doing this series. And I think you said it well, there on Sunday when you said discipleship is not a sexy word, and to submit yourself to Jesus or to one another. I think that is really the key, a process that we do have to be aware of before we go and hit these hard topics. And then the hard topics I wasn't too interested in, like knowing how tricky but particularly if we're not willing to submit to Jesus, not willing to listen to what's the true heart here of what he wants to express, and instead of getting caught up on the topics and Matt said, trying to prove that this is the right way, how do we have a process that is going to help us reflect well and listen well and then act in a way that is loving and appropriate response, because I think in today's age we can react without really considering what does God actually want to say here. So that's why I was really excited when we shifted to doing this series, and I think discipleship is something that we've lost. I don't know if it is because of the word or what it is, but I guess it is around the submission part, isn't it? Of wanting to be our own rulers of our lives and every aspect of it. To think that I have to submit to someone else, Jesus, or be it the church or how that looks. It's hard for some people and hard for all of us, I guess, to accept that. But yeah, I think as we've shared and as you unpacked it yesterday, Matt Henderson, that it's really beneficial for a lot of us to reflect on that and focus on Jesus amongst all this.
Yeah, Paul.
I actually think that I agree with what most have said. I'm probably more with Dan though. I was actually looking forward to this one more than the other one. And I think, Matt, you hit the reason for that you hit on the head is because it's a more intellectual exercise. For most people, it's something that's happening externally to them, where this was about basics. This is happening to everybody. And this happens to you, and it affects everybody differently, you know, what we went through. And yeah, I went in there thinking, it'd be great to be reminded of this. You know, and I was reminded of it, but the challenges that came from it were also quite real. In the fact that it reminds you to show hope, it reminds you about love, it reminds you about choices, it reminds you about everything that you can do to either grow with Jesus or move away from Jesus. And it was just so refreshing, actually. The more I think about it, I love the series because it was just that refreshing series that just took you back to the basics of what it means to be in a relationship with God. There wasn't any intellectual challenge. There wasn't any theological sort of debate on it. It was just like, you want a relationship with God? You want to do your best? You want to be the best person you can be? These are the things you can do. And that's what I loved about it. I really did love it. And so I was actually super appreciative of the series. And I was just thinking, as we were talking before about discipleship, that sermon series could be used as a basis for any membership class in any church. And it would be a fantastic way of welcoming people to a church, because you go, these are our ideals, this is what we believe in, this is how we move it. And I just think it's such a wonderful thing in the series. And I actually can't. I would have to say it's one of the best series I've heard in a long, long time. So I was really appreciative of it.
I think we'd want to encourage people who sort of bouncing what Paul said. I think we really want to encourage people to, if they don't have a copy of the little diagram, to grab one, and if they've missed any of the messages, to go back. They're all available on YouTube. And our hope would be that this is something we don't move away from, that this becomes part of the foundational, whether it is part of a little course we run or a welcome to the church or something, that it becomes part of our way of thinking about discipleship.
So Matt, what are we going to be talking about next week?
Well, we change gears kind of, and we're still working out whether it's still called the Next Steps. I mean, the podcast will always be called Next Steps because that's what we're interested in. But we're going to give everybody a gift next week, so it's a good week to come to church. We've been working on a little booklet on what does it mean to step into the calling that God has for you. And at the heart of our understanding of calling is that the stuff we've been talking about over these past months is the foundation, that we are called to follow Jesus. We are called to be saved in and through Jesus and to adopt his life. And then as part of that, we're called to live his way of life, which is really what we've been talking about. But then for each and every one of us, there is a specific way that works out. And we'll be talking about how do we discern and step into that. And hopefully, just as I'm really hoping this little diagram becomes part of the way we think about discipleship, we're hoping to give people tools to, because we talk a lot about calling in our church, we're hoping to give people tools and resources to think about what does this mean for me.
So you heard it here, folks. Come to church, get a present. All right. Well, this has been the Next Steps podcast. Thanks, guys, for joining us today. Thank you to all the people who are listening or watching. Please like, share, comment. Please send us your questions. And thanks for being with us on the journey. And we will see you next week.